Ohio. Somewhere before dawn. The sky so dark it hasn't decided, yet whether it wants to become morning. A 14-story office building stands alone above a sleeping city, its windows black, unseeing, the eyes of something that stopped looking down a long time ago. A figure at the glass. 14th floor. Not moving. Not checking his phone. Not reaching for anything that might hand him an answer. Just standing there. Looking down at a parking lot full of cars belonging to people whose names he can't remember anymore. A quarterly report in his hand. Red numbers. Edges crushed from being held too long, too hard, the way a man holds a thing, when he already knows what it's telling him, and still isn't ready to hear it. 52 years old. A suit that cost more than most people's rent. The eyes of a man who built an empire out of nothing. And just realized he can't remember the last time he felt anything inside it. He sets the paper down. Walks out of the office. Doesn't tell anyone where he's going. The city looked smaller from up here. That was the joke Desmond Whitaker used to make to himself. Standing at the window of the 14th floor. Looking down at a parking lot full of cars belonging to people whose names he didn't know anymore. Smaller. Because from up here, everything got smaller. The trucks. The delivery guys hauling crates through service doors before dawn. The 47 restaurants scattered across 6 states like pins pushed into a map somebody else had made for him. He used to know every name. Every face. Every kid who bussed tables at the very first Field and Flame, the one with the busted stove and the leaking roof, back when it was just him and a dream and a landlord who thought he was out of his mind. That was 23 years ago. 23 years, which sounded like nothing when you said it fast. Except it wasn't nothing. It was a whole life, folded down small enough to fit inside a number. Now he had a corner office. Now he had glass walls that let the whole floor watch him think, if they wanted to, though nobody ever did. Now he had a secretary named Priscilla, who guarded his calendar like it was a border checkpoint. Now he had numbers on a screen. Numbers that told him things he didn't want to hear, in the flat, bloodless language numbers always used. Turnover was up 9% at the Millhaven location. Complaints were up. Online reviews had slid from 4 stars down to 2.5 in 6 months, and nobody in the regional office could give him a reason that made sense. Not really. Not in a way that survived contact with a follow-up question. So he did what he always did when the numbers stopped adding up. He went to go see for himself. That decision had cost him a full morning of arguing with his own legal department, 2 of whom used the word liability so many times it started to sound like a name. It had cost him an afternoon with Pauline Foster, his head of HR, sketching out a plan that made her visibly uncomfortable, though she agreed to build it anyway, because in 20 years of working for Desmond Whitaker she had learned that when he got that particular look on his face, arguing only cost you time you didn't have. It had cost him, too, a strange and private hour standing in front of a mirror at a Motel 6 off Route 9, wearing coveralls that smelled like somebody else's sweat, staring at a stranger wearing his own face. The coveralls were gray. Ill-fitting through the shoulders. A name patch stitched crooked over the left pocket, the letters spelling out Wade in thread the color of dried blood. Desmond turned sideways in the mirror. Studied the stranger looking back at him. 52 years old, and playing dress-up like a kid on Halloween. Except the stakes weren't candy. The stakes were people. Real people, the kind he was supposed to already understand, and somehow, standing in a motel bathroom in Millhaven, Ohio, no longer did. You can do this, he told himself. Can I, though? Yes. You built an empire out of nothing, and you can't even remember the last time you talked to your own son. So what exactly makes you think you understand anybody's life, but your own? He stopped that thought before it could finish. Slammed a door on it somewhere behind his sternum. Some doors you didn't open twice in one night. Some doors, if you were being honest with yourself, you'd been keeping shut for 6 years, and one motel mirror wasn't going to be the thing that finally kicked it open. He pulled the baseball cap low, over his eyes. Practiced a voice in the mirror that wasn't his own. Flatter. Slower. A little tired around the edges, the voice of a man who fixed leaky pipes for a living, and didn't ask too many questions of anybody, including himself. He grabbed the clipboard off the bed. Fake work orders, printed on letterhead, that didn't exist anywhere else in the world. A fake badge. A fake last name, that corporate HR had cooked up in a single rushed afternoon, Talbot, because apparently even an undercover CEO needed a paper trail solid enough to survive a background check nobody was going to run. Then he drove. Millhaven at 2:40 in the morning was a town that had already gone to sleep, and had no plans to wake up for anybody. Streetlights buzzing over empty roads. A gas station glowing at the edge of town like the last lit candle left in the world. Desmond parked around the back of the restaurant, in the employee lot, beside a beat-up Honda Civic, with a cracked taillight and a faded parking permit still stuck crooked to the windshield. Ridgemont Culinary Academy, the sticker red, the ink gone soft and pale from years of sun. He noticed it. Filed it away somewhere in the back of his mind, the way he'd learned to file away small details, over 23 years of walking, into rooms full of strangers, and needing, fast, to know who mattered. He didn't know, yet that it would matter more than almost anything else he'd learned that week. The back door groaned when he pushed it open. Stainless steel hallway, cold under the fluorescent lights. The smell of yesterday's garlic still hanging in the air like a ghost, that hadn't found its way to the exit yet. Everything dark except for one light at the far end of the kitchen, flickering, like it couldn't decide whether it wanted to keep working or finally give up. And a sound. Thwack. 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 Rhythmic. Steady. Too steady for 3 in the morning, when the whole world should have been asleep, and clearly wasn't. Desmond followed the sound past the industrial dishwashers, past the walk-in cooler humming low against the silence, past a prep station wiped down, so clean it looked less like a kitchen counter, and more like a surgical table waiting on a patient. Until he reached the corner, where the flickering light did its slow, dying pulse over a cutting board. And there was a kid. Early 20s. Dark hair falling across his forehead. Chef's white spotless despite the hour, which made no sense at all, because it was 3 in the morning, and nothing should look that clean at 3 in the morning. Not a shirt. Not a kitchen. Not, Desmond would come to understand, a life. In his right hand, a knife moved, with a precision that had no business belonging to somebody this tired. And he was tired. You could see it in the set of his shoulders. In the way his neck bent forward, like something invisible was pressing down on the back of it, and had been pressing for longer than anybody should have to carry. Carrots. A whole mountain of them, sliced into pieces, so uniform they looked machine-cut. Except no machine had cut them. A boy had cut them, alone, in an empty kitchen, at an hour, when even the machines got to rest. Desmond stood there a full minute. Watching. The kid never looked up. Never reached for a phone. Never hummed along to music that wasn't playing anywhere in the room. Just him. And the knife. And an impossible pile of vegetables that apparently needed to disappear before the sun came up, for reasons Desmond didn't understand, yet and already suspected he wasn't going to like. Hell of a time to be working. The knife stopped. The kid's head snapped up, so fast his hair fell sideways across his eyes. Wide-eyed. The particular look of somebody caught doing something they weren't supposed to be doing, even though chopping vegetables in your own kitchen was about as harmless as a crime could get. And then, fast, practiced, the kid's face rearranged itself into something calm. Something polite. A mask sliding into place so smoothly Desmond nearly missed the half-second of raw fear that had lived there before it. Oh. Hey. A beat. You're new. Maintenance, right? That's me. Wade? That's me too. The kid huffed out something that might have been a laugh if it had more air behind it. Went back to the carrots. Thwack. You always do prep at 3 in the morning? Desmond asked. Casual. Careful. Someone's got to. Day crew can't handle it? Day crews slammed during service. The kid didn't look up. If I don't get ahead of it, they start behind. Once they're behind all day. Then the whole kitchen's playing catch-up till close. Every single night. Desmond leaned against the prep table. Studied the kid the way he used to study spreadsheets, hunting for the one number that didn't add up. You pull graveyard a lot? Every night. By choice? Something small and tight moved through the kid's jaw. By necessity. That word. It landed heavier than 4 syllables had any right to land. Desmond had interviewed thousands of employees over 23 years. He knew what burnout sounded like, the particular flatness of somebody who'd simply run out of gas. He knew what ambition sounded like too, the kind that kept a person up chasing a promotion, a raise, a title with more letters after it. This wasn't either of those. This was something with teeth. Kitchen's dead this time of night, Desmond said. Can't be worth much in tips. I'm not after tips. Then what are you after? The kid finished the last of the carrots. Reached for a crate of bell peppers, without missing a beat, the motion so practiced it barely counted as a pause. I need the hours to be these hours. That's all. Which wasn't an answer. Which was, very clearly, not an answer, dressed up just enough to pass, as one if you didn't look too closely. Desmond had spent a career learning when to push, and when to back off, and every instinct honed over 23 years told him, back off now. Not tonight. So he did. Made a show of checking the clipboard. Started walking toward the walk-in like that had been the plan all along, like a man simply doing his job, and nothing more. And that was when he saw the photograph. Taped to the metal shelf beside the cutting board. Corners gone soft, from handling, the way paper gets soft, when a hand returns to it again, and again, checking it's still there. A teenage boy, this same boy, younger, rounder in the face, standing beside a woman, with the same dark hair, both of them holding cotton candy, both of them caught mid-laugh at something outside the frame of the picture. Something the camera hadn't captured, but the moment clearly had. Written along the bottom, in marker gone pale, and soft with age. Mom and the last good day. Desmond felt something move in his chest. Not sharp. Slow. Like a stone dropped into still water, taking its time to reach the bottom. He didn't say anything. Didn't let his face show what had just happened somewhere behind his ribs. He walked into the walk-in freezer, checked a thermometer he didn't need to check, and stood there in the cold for a long time. Longer than the job required. Long enough that his breath fogged in front of him in slow, deliberate clouds. Last good day. What happened after that day? He didn't sleep when his shift ended. 6 in the morning, and instead of collapsing at the motel like any reasonable person would, after a night on his feet, Desmond sat by the window, with a cup of gas station coffee going cold in his hand, watching Millhaven wake up one porch light at a time. A paperboy on a bike, tossing rolled newspapers, with the careless accuracy of somebody who'd done it 10,000 times. A woman in a bathrobe, retrieving a cat from a tree that didn't seem especially high. The town coming to life around him, indifferent to the fact that its CEO was sitting in a rented room, unraveling a little from the inside. His phone buzzed on the windowsill. He almost didn't check it. Almost, because it was 6 in the morning, and nobody with good news called at 6 in the morning. That was a rule of the universe, that was simply how things worked. Except it wasn't a call. It was a text. From Priscilla. Mr. Whitaker, sorry to bother you this early. Wanted you to hear it, from someone rather than find out on social media. Grant's wife had the baby last night. A boy. Everyone's healthy. I know things are complicated between you two, but I thought you'd want to know. Desmond read it once. Read it again. Read it a third time, like the words might rearrange themselves, into something that made more sense. Something that didn't feel like a door slamming shut, from the other side. A grandson. I have a grandson. And I found out from my secretary. Because my own son couldn't. Don't turn this into a story about you. This is his day. This is his son's first day of life. You don't get to make it about the 6 years you spent not calling. Except I do think about it. I think about it every single. Stop. He set the phone down on the windowsill like it had gotten too hot to hold. Sat there a long moment, watching his own breath fog against the glass and disappear. 6 years. 6 years since Grant had stopped picking up. 6 years since a Thanksgiving dinner, that ended in the driveway, Grant's car keys already jangling in an angry fist, saying the kind of thing a man can't take back even if he spends the rest of his life wishing he could. You built this whole company on people, Dad. 47 locations of people you know the names of. And you don't even know your own grandson's name yet, do you? Because you'll never meet him. Because you're already too busy being proud of yourself to notice you're alone. That wasn't exactly what Grant had said. Not word for word. But it was close enough, that Desmond's memory had smoothed the sharp edges, over the years, the way water smooths a stone, sanding it down, into something he could carry, without cutting his hands every time he touched it. He looked at the phone again. Congratulations, he started typing. Deleted it. I'd love to, deleted it. Can I, deleted that too. Nothing sounded right. Nothing sounded like a man who'd earned the right to say anything at all about a child he hadn't been invited to meet. He put the phone face down on the windowsill. Watched a woman across the street water a row of tomato plants, that were clearly already dying, no matter how much water she gave them, and thought, not for the first time, not for the 100th time either, that he had built an empire out of exactly the kind of neglect he used to believe only happened to other people's families. He named the boy something. Priscilla didn't say what. I don't even know my grandson's name. Because you didn't ask. I know. You could ask now. I know that too. He didn't send anything. Not yet. He told himself it was, because the timing was wrong, because a text, from an absent father arriving on the exact day of his grandson's birth would look like exactly what it was, too little, 6 years too late, dressed up in the language of good intentions. He told himself a great many things, that morning, sitting in a Motel 6 off Route 9, still wearing coveralls, that smelled like somebody else's sweat. Some of those things were even true. He went back that night. Same coveralls. Same cap pulled low. Same clipboard, still holding its useless fake work orders, because apparently a man could build 47 restaurants, and still not know how to say the one true thing he needed to say to his own child. Millhaven Field and Flame at 10 p.m. was a different animal than it had been at 3. Dinner rush winding down toward its final ticket. Servers moving with the loose, relieved energy of people, who could finally see the finish line. Desmond clocked in, his badge scanned by a girl at the host stand, who never once looked up, from her phone, her name tag reading Diane in small block letters, and made his way toward the kitchen, with the clipboard tucked under one arm, like a shield he'd stopped believing in, but hadn't figured out how to put down yet. He found the same kid at the same station. Same cutting board. Same knife moving, through vegetables like a metronome nobody had asked for, though tonight it was earlier, the sun hadn't fully surrendered, yet outside, and the kitchen was still loud, with the tail end of dinner service. Pans clanging. Somebody yelling behind every few seconds, the ritual chant of every working kitchen in America. A radio somewhere playing classic rock at a volume just under audible. A name tag on the schedule taped by the walk-in read C. Reyes. Caleb Reyes. Desmond lingered near the cooler, with his clipboard, watching. Caleb worked through the noise like it wasn't there at all. Head down. Shoulders tight. Every few minutes his eyes flicked toward the clock on the wall, then back down, like the clock owed him something, and hadn't paid up yet. "You're here early," Desmond said, drawing closer. Caleb glanced up. Recognition flickered. Oh, the maintenance guy, followed by something that looked, for half a second, like genuine relief, that it wasn't somebody else. Wasn't the head chef. "Picking up an extra shift," Caleb said. Somebody called out. "You ever say no to an extra shift?" "Can't afford to." Short. Flat. Not unfriendly. Just economical, like every word cost something, and Caleb Reyes had already learned, the hard way, exactly how tight a budget could get. "You go to school for this?" Desmond asked, nodding at the knife work. "That's not self-taught. Not this clean." Something shifted behind Caleb's eyes. Fast. Gone before it could be properly read. "Little bit of both," he said, and went back to chopping. Thwack. 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 "What's your specialty?" Desmond asked, trying for lighter. Trying for the kind of small talk that opened doors instead of closing them. "My what?" "Every cook's got one. French guy makes a sauce, Italian guy makes pasta, from scratch, that kind of thing." "What's yours?" Caleb actually smiled at that. Small. Real, for half a second, before it folded back, into something more guarded. "Braising," he said. "Give me a cheap cut of meat, and 6 hours, I'll make it taste like it cost $40. That a fact?" "It's a fact." "Prove it sometime." "Maybe I will." A pause. The knife didn't stop. If corporate ever lets the night crew touch anything, that isn't a vegetable. There it was. A crack in the wall. Small, but real. "They keep you on prep that tight?" "They keep me on prep, period." Caleb's jaw tightened again, the same tell, from a moment ago. "Which is fine. It's a job. Jobs don't have to make you happy. They just have to make rent." "Except you're not talking about rent," Desmond thought. "You're talking about something bigger than rent, and you don't even realize you're doing it." He didn't say that out loud. Instead he said, "That why you pull the night shift? Rent?" The knife slowed. Not stopped. Slowed. Something like that. "Family stuff?" Caleb's whole body went still for a second, a held breath disguised, as sudden, intense concentration on a bell pepper. And then, quiet, almost too quiet to hear, over the radio. "Something like that." Desmond let the silence sit. He'd learned that trick decades ago, back when he still did his own hiring, back before HR departments and legal teams stood between him and the people who actually worked for him. Silence did more work than questions ever could. People filled silence the way water fills a low spot in the ground, not because they wanted to, but because it was the shape available to them. Caleb didn't fill it. Not tonight. "Well," Desmond said finally, tapping the clipboard against his palm. "Freezer's not going to check itself. Have fun with that." "Oh, it's a thrill a minute." That got the ghost of a laugh out of the kid. Just a ghost. But Desmond took it, as a win, and walked away, before he could ruin it by pushing further. He came back to the break room an hour later, with 2 cups of vending machine coffee, both of them terrible, and found Caleb sitting alone at the corner table, staring at his phone like it had personally wronged him. "Rough call?" Desmond asked, sliding into the seat across from him. Setting 1 coffee down without asking. Caleb looked up, startled, then shook his head, and pocketed the phone. "Insurance company," he muttered. "Long story. I've got time. Coffee's terrible, but I've got time. You always this nosy, Wade?" "Occupational hazard." Desmond took a sip. Winced. "This coffee should be illegal, by the way." "Told you." "You did not tell me. You let me buy it." "I let you make a choice." "Different thing." A small smile, real this time, lasting a whole second longer than the last one. "Free will, man. It's a beautiful thing. Free will got me burnt coffee at 11 p.m. Free will's a double-edged sword." Desmond laughed, an actual laugh, not a performance, and something in Caleb's posture eased half an inch. Just half an inch. Enough for Desmond to notice. "So," Desmond said, keeping his voice light. "Insurance. That's never good news." Caleb's smile faded. He turned the coffee cup slowly between his hands, not drinking it, just turning it, the way a man turns a problem, over and over hoping it'll look different, from another angle. "They're saying a prescription isn't medically necessary." "It is. Trust me, it very much is. But they want 3 different doctors to say, so in 3 different ways, before they'll cover it." He shook his head. "You ever try arguing with an insurance company at 11 at night on your break?" "Can't say I have." "Don't. Highly recommend against it. Blood pressure thing." Desmond studied him. The dark circles under his eyes, deeper than they had any right to be on a 22-year-old. The way his hands, steady as stone, with a knife in them, trembled just slightly around a coffee cup that wasn't even hot anymore. "Who's the prescription for?" Desmond asked. Gentle. Testing the door to see if it was locked. It was. "Nobody," Caleb said, too fast. "Family stuff. It's fine. I've got it handled." "You keep saying that." "Handled. Because I do. Doesn't look handled from where I'm sitting." Caleb's eyes came up sharp. For a second, something flared there. Not anger, exactly. The exhausted cousin of anger, the kind that comes from being seen, when you've worked very hard, for a very long time, not to be. "No offense, Wade, but you've known me 2 days. You don't know what handled looks like on me." "Fair," Desmond said, hands up. "Fair enough." The silence that followed wasn't hostile. Just tired. 2 men, one pretending to be someone he wasn't, one clearly not saying who he actually was either, sharing a break room table, and a pot of burnt coffee at 11 at night, the fluorescent light overhead buzzing its own private complaint. "Sorry," Caleb said after a while. "Didn't mean to snap." "You didn't snap. Barely raised your voice. Felt like snapping. From the outside, it read more like a light tap. If you want to actually snap sometime, I can show you how it's done. I've had practice." That earned a real laugh, short and surprised out of him, like it had escaped, before he could stop it. "Yeah. Board meetings," Desmond said, keeping his cover intact, letting the lie do a little work for him. "Used to do maintenance for a corporate office before this. You want to see people snap, sit in on a Q3 earnings call sometime. Sounds worse than a broken walk-in compressor. Infinitely worse. At least the compressor's honest about being broken." Caleb almost smiled again, and for a moment the break room felt like a place 2 ordinary men could sit in, without the weight of everything underneath the conversation. It didn't last. The head chef's voice cut, through the wall, from the kitchen, sharp, impatient, calling a name. Reyes. Breaks over. Caleb's shoulders dropped a fraction, a small internal collapse nobody else would have noticed. He stood, dumped his untouched coffee in the sink, and was halfway to the door, before Desmond could say anything else. "Hey," Desmond called after him. Caleb paused, hand on the frame. "That photo," Desmond said. "The one on your shelf. Woman with the cotton candy." Something shut behind Caleb's eyes, fast as a blind coming down, over a window. "What about it? She looks like somebody worth working this hard for." For a second, just a second, Caleb's hand tightened on the doorframe, until his knuckles went pale. Desmond thought he might say something. Thought the door might crack open just a little wider. Instead, Caleb nodded once, sharp, and disappeared back, into the kitchen, without another word. Desmond sat alone, with 2 cups of coffee, one of them full, one of them wasted, and pulled out his phone. "Pauline," he typed. "Need a full personnel file. Millhaven location. Employee C. Reyes. Everything. Emergency contact, employment history, all of it. Tonight if you can." The response came back in under a minute. "On it, Mr. Whitaker." He almost typed something else. Almost typed "and thank you for keeping me updated on Grant." Almost typed a name he didn't have, yet, his own grandson's name, a boy less than 24 hours old, a stranger who shared his blood and, so far, none of his mistakes. He put the phone in his pocket instead. Finished the bad coffee. Went back to the freezer to finish a job that didn't need finishing, because it was easier, that night, to check thermometers than to sit, with everything the last 2 days had handed him. The file came, through at 2 in the morning, while Desmond sat in his rental car in the employee lot, engine off, dashboard clock glowing green against the dark. He read it by the light of his phone, thumb scrolling slower, and slower with every line. Caleb Reyes. Age 22. No college coursework on record. He frowned. Kept reading. Emergency contact, Noreen Reyes, mother. Address, 214 Larkspur Lane, Ashwood, Ohio. Prior education, accepted, Ridgemont Culinary Academy, full scholarship, 3 years ago. Enrollment deferred. Later withdrawn. Desmond stared at that line for a long time. A full scholarship. Withdrawn. He thought about the knife work, too precise for self-taught, too controlled for somebody who'd never sat through a single formal class. He thought about the sticker on the windshield of that beat-up Civic, faded almost to nothing, a parking permit for a school this kid had apparently never actually attended. He thought about the photograph. Mom and the last good day. He thought about a boy less than a day old, somewhere across the state, whose name he still didn't know. And he thought, with a clarity that landed somewhere behind his ribs, and stayed there, something happened to this family. Something big enough to take a full scholarship, and turn it into a night shift chopping vegetables in an empty kitchen. And I am going to find out what it was. Not because it was his job. Because, and this was the part that scared him a little, sitting alone in a dark parking lot at 2 in the morning, because some part of him needed to understand how a son ends up choosing to stay. How a son ends up sacrificing everything for a parent instead of walking away, when Desmond's own son had done exactly the opposite. Had walked. Had every right to walk, probably. And Desmond had spent 6 years telling himself, that was simply how families went sometimes. People drifted. Life got busy. Nobody's fault, really. Except watching Caleb Reyes work himself past exhaustion for a mother he clearly loved past all reason made every excuse Desmond had built for himself feel thinner. More like exactly what it was. Not circumstance. Choice. He started the car. Sat with his hand on the key for a long moment, before turning it. I have a grandson, he thought. And a kid I barely know just showed me what it looks like to actually show up for the people you love. So what does that make me? He didn't have an answer. Not yet. But for the first time in longer than he wanted to admit, Desmond Whitaker drove back to a motel room not thinking about turnover numbers, or quarterly reports, or the 47 locations spread across 6 states like pins on a map he'd stopped really looking at years ago. He was thinking about a photograph taped to a metal shelf. He was thinking about a name he still didn't have, his grandson's name, and a woman named Noreen Reyes he'd never met, and a scholarship a 22-year-old had walked away from for reasons, that lived somewhere on Larkspur Lane, in a town he'd have to find on a map. He was thinking, for the first time in a long time, that maybe the numbers on the 14th floor had never once told him the real story. Maybe they never could. Maybe the real story only showed up at 3 in the morning, in an empty kitchen, in the sound of a knife against a cutting board, steady as a heartbeat, that refused to stop. Thwack. 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 He fell asleep with his coveralls still on. Clipboard on the nightstand. Phone face up beside it, a text he still hadn't sent glowing faint against the dark. Congratulations, he finally typed, somewhere near dawn, half asleep, thumb clumsy against the screen. I'd love to know his name. Whenever you're ready. No pressure. I mean that. He hit send, before he could delete it again. Then he closed his eyes, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, Desmond Whitaker slept like a man, who had somewhere he actually needed to be in the morning. Not the office. Not the 14th floor. A kitchen. A cutting board. A kid carrying something far too heavy for someone that young to carry alone. And somewhere out there, a boy with a name Desmond still didn't know, and a son, who might, if the stars lined up just right, finally answer a text. Desmond Whitaker knew he was crossing a line the second he pulled onto Route 9 behind a rusted-out Honda Civic, with a cracked taillight. Following an employee home. Not in any handbook. Not in any onboarding packet Pauline Foster had ever assembled in 20 years of HR meetings. Probably violated 4 different privacy statutes, and at least one thing his lawyers would call, in the careful language lawyers used for things they thought were terrible ideas, a genuine area of concern, Desmond. Except he told himself this was different. Told himself this was about understanding. About seeing the whole picture instead of the 14th floor version of it, the version that came filtered, through spreadsheets and quarterly summaries, and men in suits who'd never once smelled garlic clinging to a prep station at 3 in the morning. That's what he told his conscience, anyway. His conscience wasn't buying it. His conscience hadn't bought much of anything he'd told it in the last 6 years. It was Thursday. 6:15 in the morning. He'd watched Caleb clock out, through the kitchen's back window, shoulders sagging with the particular exhaustion of somebody who'd been standing, since 10 p.m., the night before, and instead of driving towards sleep like any sane 22-year-old, after a night shift, the kid had climbed into his Civic, and pointed it north. Away from Millhaven. Toward Ashwood. Desmond followed at a careful distance. 3 cars back. Radio off. Coffee going cold in the cup holder, because his stomach had knotted up somewhere around mile 4, and hadn't let go since. 40 minutes. That's how long the drive took. 40 minutes of watching a beat-up Civic hold the speed limit exactly, never once drifting, like the driver was too tired to do anything except keep both hands locked at 10 and 2 and stare straight ahead at whatever waited for him at the end of the road. What are you doing, Desmond? Following a kid home. Why? Because something's wrong. Because a full scholarship doesn't just disappear into thin air. Because you want to feel like you're helping somebody. Since you can't help the one person you're actually supposed to help. He shut that thought down hard. Slammed the mental door on it the way he had 100 times, since the text about the baby. The neighborhoods changed as they drove. Cincinnati-adjacent sprawl giving way to Ashwood's quiet grid, modest ranch houses, chain-link fences, the kind of streets where people worked 2 jobs, and mowed their lawns on Sundays, because it was one of the only things left they could still control in a life that otherwise controlled them. The Civic turned onto Larkspur Lane. Desmond parked 2 houses down. Killed the engine. And sat there. Watching. The house was pale blue with white trim. Small. Meticulously kept. Grass cut in careful, straight rows, hedges trimmed square, not a single leaf out of place on a lawn that clearly belonged to somebody, with no time, and every reason to make time anyway. Except the paint near the gutters was peeling. And one of the front windows had been patched, with duct tape, silver strip laid over silver strip, a wound somebody hadn't had the money to properly heal. Caleb got out. Grabbed a grocery bag from the back seat. When did he even stop for groceries, Desmond thought. He came straight from a 10-hour shift. Caleb moved toward the front door, with the slow, deliberate steps of a man running on fumes, and stubbornness in equal measure. The door opened. Before he reached it, somebody inside must have heard the car in the driveway, and he disappeared through it. Desmond waited 5 minutes. Then did something he would spend the rest of his life not being proud of. He got out of the car. Walked down the sidewalk. Past a neighbor's yard, where a dog barked twice, and gave up. Until he stood on the public sidewalk in front of 214 Larkspur Lane, close enough to see straight, through the front window, the one, without the tape, into the living room. And his heart stopped. Because the living room wasn't a living room anymore. It was a hospital. A bed dominated the space. Metal rails. An adjustable frame, motorized, the kind that cost more than most people's cars. Medical equipment on a rolling cart beside it, an oxygen concentrator, monitors blinking soft green numbers, into the quiet, and 4 standing sentinel like a skeletal guard keeping watch, over something precious and fragile. And in the bed, propped against pillows arranged, with obvious, practiced care, was a woman. Thin. Too thin. Dark hair going gray, pulled back loose. A cervical collar braced her neck at an angle that made Desmond's own throat ache just looking at it. Her arms lay on top of the blanket, and something about the way they lay there, motionless, positioned rather than resting, told him, before his brain fully caught up, that she couldn't move them. Not on her own. Not anymore. Noreen Reyes, he thought. This is Noreen Reyes. Caleb came into view. Still in his work clothes. Set the grocery bag down, and went straight to his mother's side, without breaking stride, like his body had made this same walk 10,000 times, and no longer needed instructions to do it. Desmond couldn't hear the words. Could only watch. Caleb adjusted a pillow. Checked something glowing on the monitor. Disappeared into what had to be the kitchen, and came back, with a bowl, and a spoon. He pulled a chair close. And began to feed her. Slow. Patient. A spoonful, a wait, a small nod of encouragement, another spoonful. Oatmeal, probably, though from the sidewalk Desmond couldn't be sure, and didn't need to be. Noreen's head turned toward her son, the only part of her that could turn freely, and even from 30 feet away, through glass, in gray morning light, Desmond could see her smile. Not a small smile. A whole one. The kind that said thank you, and I'm sorry, and I love you all stacked together in a single expression, because there wasn't time in a life like this one for 3 separate emotions, when one had to carry the weight of all of them at once. Caleb said something. Whatever it was, it made her smile wider. He kept talking. Kept feeding her. Set down the bowl eventually, picked up a water bottle, with a bent straw, held it steady against her lips, while she drank in small, careful sips. Then he checked the collar. Adjusted the blanket. Walked to the rolling cart, and wrote something on a chart hanging off the 4 stand, medications probably, timed and logged the way a professional nurse would do it, except this was a 22-year-old, with no medical training, who had apparently taught himself everything a home nursing textbook could hold. He checked his watch. His shoulders dropped, just slightly. A small internal collapse, the kind Desmond had already learned to recognize, from the break room the night before. And then Noreen said something. Her lips moved. Desmond couldn't hear it, couldn't read it exactly, but he watched Caleb straighten up. Watched him paint a smile back, over his face like a fresh coat, over old, worn wood. Watched him nod. He disappeared. Came back with a book. Settled into the chair. Opened it. And began to read aloud. Desmond stepped back from the sidewalk. His vision had gone soft at the edges, blurred, and it took him a second to understand that his eyes had filled, without him noticing it happening. The scholarship. The night shifts. The photograph. Last good day. This is why. This isn't a kid working hard to make rent. This is a son, who gave up his entire future to keep his mother alive. He walked back to his car on legs that didn't feel entirely his own. Sat behind the wheel. Gripped it until his knuckles went white, and his hands ached, and he still didn't let go, because letting go felt, in that moment, like it might mean falling apart completely in a rental car on a street he had no business standing on. He'd come to Millhaven looking for answers about turnover rates. He'd found something that took every assumption he'd ever made about strength, and rearranged it, from the ground up. His phone was in his hand, before he'd fully decided to pick it up. Pauline. It's Desmond. Mr. Whitaker? It's barely 7. I need everything on Noreen Reyes. Medical history. Insurance status. Care costs. Everything. Tonight. A pause on the line. Careful. Is everything okay? Desmond looked back at the small blue house. At a young man reading aloud to his paralyzed mother, after 10 hours on his feet, on no sleep, on nothing but stubbornness, and love and whatever was left over after those two things had taken everything else. No, he said. But it's going to be. The file came, through that evening, and it was worse than he'd braced for. Noreen Reyes. Motor vehicle collision, 3 years prior. Struck by a driver traveling 60 in a 35 zone. Blood alcohol content nearly triple the legal limit. Traumatic brain injury. Spinal cord damage, C5, C6. Survived. Barely. Paralysis from the chest down. Limited neck mobility. Requires round-the-clock care. Insurance covered initial hospitalization. Coverage for ongoing home care denied on multiple appeals, citing. Desmond stopped reading the jargon. His stomach couldn't hold it, and process it at the same time. Further down. Savings exhausted within 6 months of the accident. And then, at the bottom of the page, a line that made something in Desmond's chest go cold and hard all at once. Father, Emmett Reyes. Filed for divorce 2 months post-accident. No further contact with family on record. No child support payments identified. Current location, unknown. Desmond set the file down on the motel bed, and stared at the ceiling for a long time. He left. A man's wife nearly dies. Ends up paralyzed. Needs him more than she's ever needed anyone in her entire life. And he left. And a 22-year-old stayed. A 22-year-old gave up a full scholarship to a school he'd probably dreamed about, since he was old enough to hold a knife, and he stayed, and he's been staying every single night since, chopping vegetables in an empty kitchen, because staying costs money, and love doesn't pay the electric bill. Desmond thought about Grant. About a driveway 6 years ago. About car keys jangling in an angry fist, and a sentence that still lived rent-free somewhere behind his sternum. You don't even know your own grandson's name yet, do you? Because you'll never meet him. He hadn't left, not the way Emmett Reyes had left. Not officially. He'd never filed papers on his own son. But he'd done something slower. Something that maybe hurt worse for taking longer, for happening one missed dinner, and one rescheduled call, and one I'll make it up to you, I promise at a time, until 6 years had piled up behind him like unpaid debt nobody had bothered to itemize. He picked up his phone. No new messages. No response to the text he'd sent at dawn 2 days ago. I'd love to know his name. Whenever you're ready. No pressure. Nothing. Well, he thought, bitter and small. What did you expect? 6 years of silence doesn't undo itself, with one text sent at 4 in the morning by a man wearing a fake name badge. He put the phone face down. Picked the file back up instead, because at least this was a problem he could see the shape of. At least this was a family he hadn't broken himself. Not yet, anyway. He was about to find out how close he'd come. Friday night. 10 p.m. Desmond clocked in, as Wade Talbot for what felt, by now, like the 100th time, though it had only been 4 days. He found Caleb doing inventory in the walk-in cooler, clipboard in hand, pen slipping between fingers, that wouldn't quite hold steady. The kid looked worse than Desmond had seen him yet. Gray around the mouth. Swaying, just barely, the way a tree sways in wind too small to notice, unless you're watching for it. Caleb, Desmond said. You got a minute? Caleb glanced up, startled, clipboard nearly dropping. Jesus, Wade. You scared me. Sorry. Kind of busy. Take 5 minutes. Don't have 5 minutes. Take them anyway. Something about Desmond's tone, flatter than usual, more certain, made Caleb pause. Set the clipboard down on a shelf between boxes of frozen peppers. What? That photo, Desmond said. In the kitchen. The one with your mom. Caleb's whole face closed like a door. What about it? You said you had a scholarship. Culinary school. I don't want to talk about this. I think you need to. Why? Caleb's voice cracked up half an octave, sharp and sudden. Why do you care? You're a maintenance guy I met 4 days ago. No offense, Wade. My life isn't your business. Maybe not. Desmond kept his voice steady, low. But I've been doing this a long time. Reading people. And I know when somebody's drowning, Caleb. I know what it looks like. For a second, Caleb looked like he might bolt. Chest rising too fast. Eyes darting toward the cooler door. And then something in him just cracked. Not broke. Cracked, the way ice cracks, before it gives, a sound you hear, before you ever see the damage underneath. He leaned back against the metal shelving. Arms wrapped around himself against the cold, or against something colder than the cold. Ridgemont Culinary Academy, he said finally, voice hollow. Full ride. Academic and talent-based. I'd been cooking since I was 12. Taught myself off library books, and bad internet videos, because we couldn't afford lessons. A bitter laugh, no air behind it. My mom used to joke I'd be the next big thing. She was so proud, when the acceptance letter came in the mail. Desmond said nothing. Let the silence be a container. I was supposed to start that August. Had my dorm assignment. Class schedule. Everything packed. Caleb's voice thinned, went somewhere far away. Mom was going to drive me. Make a whole trip out of it. She'd never really been anywhere. She never got to go. The accident. July. 3 weeks before I was supposed to leave. Caleb's hands curled, into fists, unconsciously, knuckles white against his own forearms. Some guy leaving a bar at 2 in the afternoon. Drunk out of his mind. Doing 60 in a 35. Mom was just going to the grocery store. That's it. That's the whole reason she was even on that road. Desmond felt the words land like stones, one after another. Doctors said she'd never walk again. Never use her arms right. Need round-the-clock care for the rest of her life. Caleb's voice had gone mechanical now, reciting facts the way you recite them, when actually feeling them is too expensive. My dad couldn't handle it. Gone by September. Divorce papers in the mail. A note that said Caleb stopped. Swallowed hard. Doesn't matter what it said. And you stayed. Caleb looked at him like the question was absurd. She's my mom. The school. Couldn't they defer? Tried. You can't defer a full ride forever. After a year they gave my spot to somebody else. Wait list a mile long. I get it. His laugh cracked in the middle, right down the seam. So I got a job. Got 3 jobs, actually, that first year, trying to cover what insurance wouldn't. Nothing paid enough. And I couldn't work days, because she needed me during the day. Home care nurses run $4,000 a month. We didn't have $4,000. We didn't have 400. So you learn to do it yourself. Wound care. Medications. PT exercises. Feeding, when she couldn't manage a fork. Another laugh, sharper this time, closer to breaking than to humor. Guess I got an education after all. Just not the one I wanted. The cooler door swung open, before Desmond could respond. Victor Marsh filled the frame, red-faced, apron-stained, radiating the particular fury of a man, whose ticket times were running long, and needed somebody to blame for it. Reyes. What the hell are you doing back here? Sorry, chef. I don't want sorry. I want peppers. Victor's eyes cut sideways to Desmond, narrowed, suspicious in a way, that had nothing to do with peppers at all. And you? Maintenance. This isn't a social hour. Just finishing up, Desmond said, keeping his voice level. Victor held his gaze a second too long. A beat that felt, even then, like it meant something Desmond hadn't figured out yet. Then he turned, and stormed off, leaving the cooler door swinging. Caleb grabbed his clipboard, hands still shaking. I have to go. Caleb. I have to go, Wade. He was gone, before Desmond could say anything else. Desmond stood alone in the cold, breath fogging in front of him, thinking about a father, who left and a son, who stayed and a chef, whose eyes had lingered a half-second too long to mean nothing. Victor Marsh found him 20 minutes later. Not in the kitchen. In the back hallway, near the dry storage, where the fluorescent light buzzed low, and nobody had a reason to walk through after 10 p.m., Wade, Victor said. Except the way he said it, slow, almost amused, made the fake name sound like a joke only he was in on. Chef. Funny thing. Victor leaned against a shelf of canned tomatoes, arms crossed, entirely too relaxed for a man who'd been yelling about ticket times 20 minutes earlier. I was at a regional manager's dinner 2 years back. Charity thing. Corporate flew in the big boss to say a few words. A pause, deliberate. Guy looked a lot like you. Minus the coveralls. Desmond felt his stomach drop through the floor. I don't know what you're talking about. Sure you do. Victor smiled, and there was nothing warm in it. Mr. Whitaker. The hallway seemed to shrink around them. Desmond's mind raced, through options, deny it, laugh it off, call security on his own kitchen, and landed on none of them fast enough. How long have you known? Since your second night. Victor pushed off the shelf, stepped closer, voice dropping into something quiet and dangerous. Watched you ask way too many questions for a guy who's supposed to be fixing pipes. What do you want, Victor? See, that's the right question. Victor's smile widened. Regional manager positions opening up next quarter. Everybody knows it. I've been busting my back for 3 years waiting for it. He tilted his head. I figure a man in your position, a man walking around his own restaurant under a stolen name, might understand the value of a little discretion. And I figure discretion's worth something. You're blackmailing me. I'm negotiating. Victor spread his hands, all mock innocence. You keep playing dress up, as long as you want. I don't say a word. Corporate doesn't get an anonymous tip about their CEO going off the reservation, without legal sign-off. All I need in return is a name on a promotion letter come next quarter. Desmond's jaw tightened. 23 years of business instinct screamed at him, don't ever let anyone leverage you, not once, because it never stops at once, but underneath that, something colder and clearer was already forming. Because this was exactly the kind of man who'd write a memo cutting a night shift, and never once think about who'd be standing behind the knife, when it finally landed. I'll think about it, Desmond said. Flat. Giving nothing away. Don't think too long. Victor straightened his apron, unbothered, already turning to leave. Ticket times wait for no man, Mr. Whitaker. Neither does opportunity. He walked off whistling. Actually whistling, like he'd just closed a deal instead of threatened a man twice his net worth in an empty hallway smelling of canned tomatoes, and old grease. Desmond stood there for a long moment. So that's who's been running this kitchen, into the ground. Not incompetence. Ambition. The wrong kind, aimed in exactly the wrong direction. Which means everything Caleb's been dealing with, the impossible hours, the constant pressure, some of that's just this man clearing a path for himself, one exhausted employee at a time. And I never noticed. Because I stopped walking my own kitchens years ago. He didn't sleep well that night either. The memo went up the following Tuesday morning, taped to the break room bulletin board at an angle, that suggested whoever posted it hadn't cared enough to straighten it. Desmond read it twice. Jaw tightening with every line. Effective in 3 weeks, due to corporate efficiency review, night shift prep operations will be consolidated into day shift responsibilities. Night crew reduced to 1 custodial staff member, and 1 line cook for late night orders only. All prep must be completed between 6 a.m. and 10 p.m. He felt something cold settle behind his ribs. Because this was his fault. Not directly, he hadn't signed this specific memo, hadn't seen this specific name on this specific page. But 6 months ago, sitting in a boardroom on the 14th floor, he'd pushed for efficiency reviews across every location. Told his COO, Gordon Pierce, to find the fat, and trim it. Gordon had taken that directive and run with it. Handed it to regional management. Regional management had handed it to Victor Marsh, who, Desmond now understood, had every incentive in the world to make the numbers look exactly the way corporate wanted them to look, whether or not the numbers told the whole truth. And now Caleb's going to lose the only shift that lets him take care of his mother. Because of a decision I made, without ever once thinking about who'd be standing on the other end of it. He crumpled the memo in his fist, and went looking for Caleb, found him at his station, the same knife, the same mechanical rhythm, except tonight something was wrong with it. Tonight the rhythm wasn't steady. Tonight his hands were shaking hard enough, that the knife kept catching wrong, small stutters in a motion, that should have been flawless. Caleb. No response. Thok. Uneven now. Wrong. You see the memo? The knife stopped. Caleb's shoulders went rigid, but he didn't turn around. Yeah, he said. Voice flat. Dead flat, like something inside had already given up, before the rest of him caught up. I saw it. What are you going to do? What can I do? Caleb finally turned, and his eyes were red-rimmed, hollow in a way that hadn't been there 4 days ago. Find another job. Hope they've got a night shift. Hope it pays enough. Hope I don't lose the house before I find something. A laugh, brittle as dry leaves. Hope's worked out great for me so far. Before Desmond could answer, Victor's voice cracked across the kitchen like a whip. Reyes. Where the hell are my peppers? Needed them 20 minutes ago. Coming, chef. Coming isn't good enough. Victor stormed over, red-faced, and grabbed the onions Caleb had been cutting, holding them up, with a sneer. Inconsistent. This is amateur work. What happened to you? You used to be good. I'm trying, Caleb said, and his voice cracked right down the middle. Try harder. Victor's eyes flicked to Desmond, brief and cold, a warning disguised as indifference. I want those peppers, and that zucchini done in 30 minutes. And if you can't handle it, maybe you shouldn't clock in tomorrow. He stormed off. Left a wake of silence behind him thick enough to choke on. Desmond watched Caleb's hands shake worse now, gripping the edge of the cutting board like it was the only thing holding him upright. Watched him take a breath that didn't seem to go all the way down. Watched him reach for the peppers, with fingers that trembled, so badly the knife nearly slipped. When's the last time you ate? Desmond asked, quiet. I'm fine. That's not what I asked. I said I'm fine. Caleb's voice snapped up sharp, then immediately folded in on itself. Sorry. I'm sorry, Wade. I need to get this done. Desmond watched him work another 5 minutes. The cuts were getting sloppier. The breathing shallower. The tremor in his hands worse, not better. I'm taking my break, Desmond said. You should too. Can't. Need to finish. Caleb. Break. Now. Something in his voice, the voice of a man used to being obeyed by rooms full of executives, even buried under a fake name, and a bad Midwestern accent, cut through the exhaustion. Caleb set down the knife. Followed him to the break room like a man walking in his sleep. Desmond bought a sandwich from the vending machine. Set it in front of him. Eat. I'm not hungry. Eat it anyway. Caleb picked it up with shaking hands. Took a bite. Then another. Within 2 minutes he'd devoured the whole thing like something starving, which, Desmond realized, with a sick lurch in his own stomach, was exactly what he was. Desmond bought a second one without a word. When's the last time you slept? He asked. I don't know. Saturday, maybe. Friday. Caleb dragged both hands down his face. Had to take Mom to a doctor's appointment Monday, during the day. Couldn't sleep before my shift. Then yesterday the insurance thing again, they're trying to deny her muscle relaxers, saying they're not medically necessary. His voice climbed, cracked, climbed again. You ever try arguing with an insurance company? It's like screaming into a wall that's been trained to scream back in legal jargon. Caleb. And now this. His voice broke entirely on the word this. The shift cut. I can't work days, Wade. I can't. If I lose this job we lose the house. If we lose the house she goes, into a state facility, and do you know what those places are like? She'll die there. She'll give up and die. Caleb. I can't let that happen. His hands came up, pressed against his own face, fingers digging into his eyes like he could physically hold himself together that way. I can't. She's all I have. She's. His voice broke completely. Shoulders started shaking. Desmond reached out. Put a hand on the kid's shoulder, the maintenance man's hand, the CEO's hand, both of them belonging, for once, to the same person trying to do the same thing. He wanted to say I'm going to fix this. Wanted to say I own this company, and I am going to make sure nothing bad happens to you, or your mother, not now, not ever. He couldn't. Not without blowing everything open, before he was ready. Not without risking making it all so much worse. You're going to get through this, he said instead. I promise you, Caleb. You're going to be okay. Caleb laughed wetly into his hands. Yeah. Sure. The break room door swung open. Victor again. Reyes. Break's over. Caleb wiped his face fast, stood, swayed slightly on his feet. Desmond watched him walk back, into the kitchen on unsteady legs, watched him pick the knife back up, watched him try, one more time, to hold something together, that had already started coming apart at the seams. At 4:37 in the morning, Desmond found him. He'd been checking the dry storage, an excuse, mostly, a reason to walk the building, and think, when he spotted a shape on the floor behind a stack of rice bags. Caleb. Curled on his side. Chef's coat bunched under his head for a pillow. Dead asleep, the way a person only sleeps, when their body finally overrides everything their mind was trying to force it to do. His face, for the first time, since Desmond had met him, was peaceful. Desmond stood over him for a long moment. Didn't wake him. Pulled out his phone, took a single photograph, not to shame him, not for any file, or record, but because some part of him needed proof, that this moment had happened. That a kid this exhausted could still, for one stolen hour, look this at peace. Then he took off his own jacket, and draped it gently, over Caleb's sleeping form. And stood guard at the storage room door, arms crossed, making sure nobody disturbed him. Some rest, he thought, was worth protecting. Even if it only lasted an hour. He didn't go back to the motel that morning. Sat instead in the rental car outside the restaurant, dashboard clock ticking past 5 a.m., phone heavy in his hand. I have to try again. Do I, though? Yes. Because if a 22-year-old can give up his entire future for the person he loves, the least I can do is dial a phone number. He found Grant's contact. His thumb hovered over the call button for longer than he wanted to admit. What if he doesn't pick up? He probably won't pick up. Then why are you calling? Because not calling hasn't worked for 6 years. Because watching that kid feed his mother oatmeal at 6 in the morning taught me something about showing up, that I apparently needed a stranger to teach me, since my own life wasn't lesson enough. He hit call. It rang. Once. Twice. 3 times, the sound stretching out in the quiet car like something being pulled thin. 4 rings. Please. 5. The line clicked. For half a second Desmond's heart leapt, and then the automated voicemail greeting started, Grant's recorded voice, younger sounding than he remembered, flat and practiced. You've reached Grant. Leave a message. The beep. Desmond opened his mouth. Nothing came out for 3 full seconds. Hey, he finally said, voice rougher than he meant it to be. It's Dad. A pause. Too long. I heard about the baby. I should have called sooner. I should have called a lot of things sooner. Another pause, worse than the first. I'd really like to meet him. Whenever you're ready. I know I don't get to ask for that. I'm asking anyway. He closed his eyes. I'm sorry, Grant. For a lot of things. I know that's not, I know a voicemail isn't. He stopped. Couldn't find the rest of the sentence. Call me back. If you want to. No pressure. A breath. I love you. I should have said that more. I'm saying it now. He ended the call, before his voice could break entirely. Sat there in the dark, phone in his lap, engine off, watching his own breath fog faintly against the windshield in the cold morning air. No callback came. Not that morning. Not by the time the sun came fully up, over Millhaven and the day's shift started trickling into the parking lot, yawning, unaware that their CEO was sitting 40 feet away in a rental car, undone by two different kinds of exhaustion at once. Nobody's coming, Desmond. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Except that's exactly what you'd have said about Caleb Reyes 4 days ago. That nobody like that existed anymore. Somebody who'd stay. Somebody who'd sacrifice everything, and keep showing up anyway, night after night, exhausted, unpaid in every way, that mattered, because love doesn't wait for convenient timing. So maybe you don't get to give up on your own son, after one unanswered voicemail. Maybe showing up looks like trying again tomorrow. And the day after that. Maybe that's the whole lesson. Maybe that's what this whole miserable, undercover, coveralls and clipboard week has actually been trying to teach you. He started the engine. Drove back to the motel, as the sky, over Ohio turned the color of a bruise healing, purple fading into gray fading into the pale gold of a morning that hadn't decided yet whether it was going to be kind. He thought about Caleb, asleep on a storage room floor, with a CEO's jacket for a blanket. He thought about Noreen, waiting in a hospital bed in her own living room for the sound of her son's car in the driveway. He thought about a baby boy somewhere in Ohio, whose name he still didn't know, and a son, who hadn't called back, and a chef named Marsh, whose ambition had put a whole family's future on a 3-week countdown clock. And somewhere underneath all of it, quiet and stubborn, as a pilot light, that refuses to blow out even in a storm, Desmond Whitaker felt something he hadn't felt in the 14th floor office in longer than he could remember. Not guilt. Not grief, exactly. Resolve. 3 weeks, he thought, pulling into the motel parking lot, as the sun finally broke clean, over the horizon. That's how long I have to fix what I broke. All of it. Every last piece. And I'm going to need every single day. Desmond Whitaker didn't end the undercover assignment the next morning. He knew better than that by now. He'd learned, over 23 years of building something out of nothing, that the difference between a plan that worked and a plan that blew up in your face usually came down to patience. Not the kind of patience that felt like waiting. The kind that felt like grinding, quietly, at something until it was airtight. So he stayed under. Wade Talbot clocked in for 6 more nights. 6 more nights of coveralls, and a fake badge, and a clipboard that had stopped meaning anything except cover. 6 more nights of watching Caleb Reyes hold himself together, with nothing but stubbornness, and a countdown clock ticking down toward 0. Behind the scenes, the real work happened in a different language entirely. Calls to legal, 3 of them a day, sometimes more. Calls to Pauline Foster, who stopped asking questions, after the 4th request, and simply started saying on it, Mr. Whitaker, like a woman who decided somewhere around request 3, that this was the most important project of her career. She pulled labor logs. Cross-referenced them against what Victor Marsh had submitted to corporate. Built a spreadsheet, so thorough it could have doubled, as a legal brief, because in a way, it was one. Calls to Gordon Pierce, the COO, who listened to Desmond's plan, with the particular silence of a man doing math in his head, and not liking the sum it came to. You want to reverse the efficiency memo, Gordon said. Flat. Testing the words in his mouth like they might not fit. I want to gut it. Desmond, that memo saved us $400,000 in labor costs across 11 locations. And it's about to cost us a kid his mother's life. Tell me which number you want on your conscience, Gordon. Silence on the line. Long enough that Desmond thought the call had dropped. You've been gone a week and a half, Gordon said finally. What happened out there? Desmond looked out the motel window at a parking lot slowly filling, with the day's first light. I found out what we actually sell, he said. Turns out it was never the food. It took 10 days. 10 days of building a case Victor Marsh couldn't wriggle out of of quietly reassigning line cooks to other locations, so the crew wouldn't be short-handed the night everything finally broke open, of Pauline flying to Ohio herself to sit across a conference table, with 2 employment attorneys, and make sure every document had a signature that would hold up, if Victor decided to fight it in court, which, everyone privately agreed, he almost certainly would. 10 days. Which meant, by the time Desmond finally walked back, into Millhaven Field, and flame as himself, the memo had exactly 11 days left on its clock. He cut it close. He knew he cut it close. But some things you couldn't rush, without breaking them. Wednesday night, 2 weeks and 1 day, since he'd first put on Wade Talbot's name tag, Desmond walked into Millhaven Field, and flame not, as Wade, but as himself. Suit instead of coveralls. No clipboard. No fake badge. Pauline Foster beside him, Gordon Pierce a step behind, both of them carrying folders thick enough to double as doorstops. The kitchen went quiet the second he walked through the door. Because word travels fast in a restaurant. Because somebody had seen a man in an expensive suit walk through the back hallway that afternoon, checking things, asking Diane at the host stand pointed questions about staffing, and somebody else had put 2 and 2 together, and whispered it down the line, until the whole night crew stood frozen at their stations like they'd been caught mid-crime. Victor Marsh came out of his office fast, apron still on, face draining of color the second he saw who was standing in his kitchen. "Mister," he stopped. Swallowed. Tried again. "Mr. Whitaker. I didn't realize you'd be, we weren't told corporate was." "I know you weren't told." Desmond's voice was level. Calm in the specific way that made experienced businessmen nervous, because calm from a man who usually raised his voice meant something worse was coming. "I wasn't Wade Talbot, Victor. You knew that already." The color that had drained from Victor's face came rushing back, hot, blotchy across his neck. "I don't know what you're. You threatened me in a hallway 10 nights ago. Next to the canned tomatoes. You wanted a promotion in exchange for your silence." Desmond let that hang in the kitchen air, watching every night crew member within earshot go very, very still. "That's called extortion, Victor. Against your own CEO. In your own kitchen." Somewhere behind the line, a pan hit a burner harder than it needed to. Nobody moved to fix it. Victor's voice cracked, high and thin, nothing like the man who'd bellowed at Caleb over ticket times 2 weeks ago. "I was joking." "It was a joke, Mr. Whitaker, I swear to God. You also filed labor reports that inflated night shift inefficiency by nearly 30%. Pauline stepped forward, opening one of her folders, with the crisp efficiency of a woman who'd spent 3 sleepless nights building an airtight case. "We pulled the actual production logs against what you submitted to corporate. The numbers don't match, Victor. Not even close." Victor's mouth opened. Closed. Opened again with nothing behind it. "You wanted the regional manager position," Desmond said quietly. "So you made your night crew look expendable to clear your own path forward. Doesn't matter to you that a kid on that crew is the only thing standing between his mother and a state facility. Doesn't matter that you screamed at him for shaking hands he couldn't control, because he hadn't slept in 3 days. I didn't know about. You knew enough." Desmond's voice didn't rise. Didn't need to. "You knew he was drowning, and you used it as leverage against me instead of ever asking a single question about why." The kitchen was dead silent now. Every burner still lit, every pan still sizzling, and not one sound from a single person standing in that room except the low hum of exhaust fans overhead. Effective immediately, Gordon Pierce said, stepping forward with his own folder, "You're relieved of your position, pending a full review by HR and legal. Security will escort you to collect your things." Victor's face crumpled, not with remorse, Desmond noted, but with the particular fury of a man watching a plan collapse he'd been building for years. You can't, I've worked here 11 years. 11 years, Desmond said. And you spent the last one of them making the people under you disposable, so you could climb over them. He shook his head, slow, tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. That's not the kind of leader Field and Flame needs, Victor. That was never who we were supposed to be. 2 security officers appeared at the kitchen entrance, Pauline's doing, arranged with the same quiet precision as everything else she'd built over the last 10 days. Victor looked around the kitchen one last time, at the crew, who wouldn't meet his eyes, at the line cooks who'd spent months flinching at the sound of his voice, and something in his face finally understood there was no argument left to make. He walked out without another word. The kitchen exhaled, as one body the moment the door swung shut behind him. Desmond found Caleb in the walk-in, where he seemed to end up whenever the world got too loud for him to stand in the middle of it. Clipboard forgotten on a shelf. Hands pressed flat against his own thighs like he was trying to hold himself together, through sheer physical pressure. Wade, Caleb said, and then stopped. Blinked. Looked at the suit. Looked at the 2 folders under Pauline's arm, the security officers disappearing down the hallway, with Victor Marsh between them. What's happening? What's going on? Desmond stepped into the cooler. Let the door swing shut behind him, the cold settling around them both the way it had the first night this conversation had almost happened. My name isn't Wade Talbot, he said. Caleb's face did something complicated, confusion first, then a kind of dawning horror, as pieces started sliding into place. You were the guy at the regional dinner. The one Victor kept talking about. Desmond Whitaker, he said, quiet. I own Field and Flame. All 47 locations. I've owned it, since I opened the first one, with a busted stove, and nothing else. Caleb took a step back, hit the shelving behind him, metal rattling. You lied to me. This whole time. Every conversation. The coffee. You watched me. You knew who I was, and you just. I did. Desmond didn't flinch from it. Didn't soften it. I came here, because turnover was up, and the numbers didn't make sense on paper. And then I met you, and I understood exactly why the paper never tells the real story. You followed me home. Caleb's voice cracked, rage and betrayal tangled together, so tight they came out, as the same sound. You saw my mom. You saw everything, and you never said a word, you just kept pretending to be some guy fixing pipes. I did that too. And I'm sorry for it. I invaded something that wasn't mine to see. Desmond's own voice thinned, unsteady for the first time. But Caleb, what I saw. What you're doing for her. I couldn't walk away from it. I tried. I couldn't. So what, you're firing me now? Caleb's hands curled into fists at his sides, shaking, though whether from cold or fury Desmond couldn't tell anymore. Is that what this is? I fell asleep on a storage room floor one time, and now you're. I think you're extraordinary. The words landed in the cold air between them, and just sat there. Caleb stopped mid-sentence, mouth still open around a word he never finished. You gave up a full scholarship to one of the best culinary programs in the country, Desmond continued, quiet now, no performance left in it. You've worked yourself past exhaustion for 3 years, alone, with no help, and no thanks, because your mother needed you more than your future did. That's not a liability, Caleb. That's the strongest thing I've seen in longer than I can remember. Caleb's jaw worked. Nothing came out. Victor's gone, Desmond said. The memo's dead. It's not happening. Not to you, not to anybody on that crew. Why? Caleb's voice cracked on the single syllable. Why are you doing this? What do you want from me? Desmond stepped closer. Kept his voice steady even, though something in his chest had come loose days ago, and hadn't found its way back into place. "I don't want anything from you, son." The word slipped out, before he could catch it, "son," and something flickered across Caleb's face at the sound of it, something raw and unguarded. "I'm here to give you something back. If you'll let me." The paperwork took longer than Desmond wanted. Lawyers insisted. Liability waivers, medical authorizations, tuition agreements, a dozen documents that needed signatures and notarization, and the particular patience Desmond had never had much of, not even in the 14th floor days. But 2 weeks later, on a Saturday afternoon, Desmond pulled into the driveway of 214 Larkspur Lane, with Pauline Foster in the passenger seat and Gordon Pierce in the back, a certified check between them, that made his accountant visibly nervous every time somebody mentioned the number out loud. Caleb opened the door before they reached it. Something had changed in him already, small things. The circles under his eyes lighter. His shoulders sitting an inch higher than they had 2 weeks ago. "Mr. Whitaker." Still uncomfortable, with the formality, that was clear in his voice. "Come in. Mom's, she's been asking about you." The living room looked different in daylight. The medical equipment hadn't moved, wouldn't move, not for a long time yet, but there were fresh flowers on the windowsill now. Sunlight through clean glass. A room that had started, slowly, to feel like a home instead of a waiting room. Noreen Reyes sat in a new motorized wheelchair near the window, courtesy of an insurance appeal Pauline's team had finally forced through. Lavender cardigan. Hair styled with more care than it had probably received in months. When she saw Desmond, her whole face lit up in a way that told him, instantly, exactly where her son had learned to smile like that. "Mr. Whitaker." Her voice was soft, but clear. "Caleb's told me what you're doing for us." I don't have the words." Desmond pulled up a chair, sat close enough to be at her eye level, because he'd learned somewhere in the last 2 weeks, that the smallest gestures carried the most weight. "Mrs. Reyes, your son is one of the most remarkable people I've ever met. What we're doing isn't charity. It's recognition of someone who embodies everything this company is supposed to stand for." Tears welled in Noreen's eyes. "He gave up so much for me. His school. His whole future. He learned that from somebody," Desmond said gently. Noreen laughed, wet and startled. "Maybe. I raised him to be strong. I just wish he didn't have to be this strong." "He won't have to be. Not anymore." Pauline stepped forward, laying documents across the small table beside Noreen's chair, with the crisp precision of a woman closing the most important deal of her career. "Mrs. Reyes, Caleb, here's what we've arranged." She walked them through it. Medical expenses covered for 12 months, reassessed and extended as needed. A night nurse, Pauline had already found one, a woman named Rosa, with 15 years of home care experience, and a reputation for warmth that showed in every reference she'd checked. A part-time day nurse to give Caleb actual breaks, real ones, the kind he hadn't had in 3 years. Tuition. Full coverage for an accredited online culinary program, starting in 6 weeks, giving Caleb time to prepare. A promotion, assistant prep lead at a location 20 minutes closer to home. Salary that finally matched the work he'd been doing in the shadows for years. A schedule built around his mother's needs instead of against them. And the check. $15,000 for home modifications, sliding onto the table, with a soft, unremarkable sound that didn't match the weight of what it represented. "This is too much," Caleb said, voice thick. I can't." "You can," Desmond said. "And you will. Because you've earned every bit of it." Noreen was crying openly now. Caleb moved to her side, knelt by her wheelchair. She couldn't hug him, her arms wouldn't cooperate, not fully, not yet, but she leaned her head against his, and they stayed there a long moment, mother and son, foreheads touching, both of them finally allowed to breathe. "Thank you," Noreen whispered, looking past her son to Desmond. Thank you for seeing my boy. Really seeing him. Desmond felt his own throat close. He's hard to miss, he said, voice rough, once you know where to look. They spent an hour going through the rest of it. Paperwork, questions, introductions, Rosa arriving mid-visit, warm and unhurried, kneeling immediately by Noreen's chair to introduce herself properly instead of talking over her the way so many others had. As Desmond prepared to leave, Caleb walked him to the door. Mr. Whitaker. Quiet. Why did you do this? Really? There are thousands of employees in this company. Why me? Desmond thought about the answer for a long moment. Thought about a text at dawn about a grandson he hadn't met. Thought about a voicemail that still, weeks later, hadn't been returned. Because I spent 23 years building restaurants, he said finally, and somewhere along the way, I forgot they're built by people. Real people, with real struggles and real dreams. He put a hand on Caleb's shoulder. You reminded me why I started this whole thing in the first place. Caleb nodded, eyes bright, and Desmond turned to leave. He got exactly 3 steps toward the car, before his phone buzzed in his pocket. He almost didn't check it. Almost. Because habit had taught him that phones buzzing on a Saturday afternoon rarely meant anything good. Except this time it wasn't habit that made him look. It was hope, thin and stubborn, the kind he'd been carrying around for weeks, without quite admitting it was there. A text. From Grant. Got your voicemail. Took me a while to know what to say back. Desmond stood frozen in the Reyes driveway, thumb hovering over the screen. Another text came through before he could respond. His name is Theo. Desmond's breath caught somewhere behind his ribs. Theo, he thought. My grandson's name is Theo. A third text. I'm not saying everything's fine. It's not. 6 years is 6 years. But. Maybe you could come by sometime. Meet him. If you actually meant what you said. Desmond's hands were shaking as he typed back. I meant it. I mean it. Name the day and I'll be there. Sunday, Grant wrote back. 2 o'clock. Don't be late. He naps at 3. Desmond let out a laugh, that came out closer to a sob, standing in a driveway in Ashwood, Ohio, in front of a small blue house, with fresh flowers in the window. Sunday. 2 o'clock. Theo. Don't be late. I won't, he typed. I promise. He pocketed the phone, and looked back at the house, where Caleb stood in the doorway, watching him with the particular expression of somebody who'd just been handed his whole future back, and didn't quite trust it wasn't going to disappear. Good news? Caleb asked. Desmond wiped his eyes, unashamed, and nodded. The best kind. The kind you don't think you're going to get. Caleb smiled, small, real, a mirror of the thing happening in Desmond's own chest. Yeah, he said. I know that feeling. 6 months pass the way 6 months do, when a life is finally moving in the right direction, quickly, and yet each single day of it counted, weighed, remembered. Caleb finished his first 2 semesters online, with a 4.0, cooking in a real kitchen by day, and studying knife theory, and food science by night, no longer running on fumes, because sleep had finally become something he was allowed to have. Noreen's physical therapy sessions, funded and consistent for the first time, since the accident, brought small victories, that felt enormous, a finger that could grip a spoon on its own, a shoulder that could lift an inch higher than it could the month before. And Desmond drove to Grant's house every other Sunday. Sat on the floor, with a baby named Theo, who had his mother's eyes and, somehow, already, a laugh that sounded exactly like Grant's had at that age. The conversations with Grant stayed careful for a long time. Stayed short. Stayed honest in the particular, painful way that honesty has to be honest, before it can be easy. But they kept happening. Every other Sunday. 2 o'clock. Don't be late. The Columbus location opened on a bright Saturday in May, and it had been, from the first sketch to the final coat of paint, Desmond's own project. Not the biggest restaurant in the chain. Not the most profitable, not by a long shot. But the most meaningful, by a margin nothing else in the company could touch. An open kitchen design, so every guest could watch a meal being built instead of just eating what arrived. A community board by the entrance for local job postings, tutoring services, anything a neighborhood needed passed along hand to hand. A scholarship fund poster near the door, announcing culinary grants for students, who needed exactly what Caleb once had, and gave up. Desmond stood near the ribbon stretched across the entrance, adjusting his tie for the third time in 5 minutes, eyes drifting again, and again to the parking lot. Then he saw it. Caleb's Civic, cleaner now, taillight fixed, pulling into a reserved spot near the front. Caleb got out first. Chef's coat, but not the standard white one. A sharp black coat, name embroidered clean across the chest, Chef Caleb Reyes, Assistant Kitchen Director. He'd filled out, over 6 months, the gauntness gone, color back in his face, looking, for the first time, since Desmond had met him, genuinely, fully alive. He moved around to the passenger side. Helped his mother out with careful, practiced hands. Noreen Reyes, in her wheelchair, looked radiant. Hair styled, a blue dress, that matched her eyes exactly, the neck brace still there, some things wouldn't change, not fully, not ever, but her smile was real, and it was bright enough to fill the whole parking lot. Behind them, Rosa pushed a second wheelchair. An older woman Desmond didn't recognize at first, until the resemblance clicked into place, Noreen's own mother, flown in from out of state for the occasion, tears already gathering in her eyes, before the ribbon had even been cut. "Sorry we're late," Caleb called out, breathless, pushing his mother's chair toward the entrance. Traffic was a nightmare. "You're right on time," Desmond said, meeting him halfway, shaking his hand, before crouching to Noreen's eye level. "Mrs. Reyes. You look beautiful. Thank you for being here. I wouldn't miss this for the world." Her voice was stronger now than it had been 6 months ago. Physical therapy and steady care had given her that much back, at least. "My son. Opening a restaurant with Desmond Whitaker. I still can't quite believe it's real." "Believe it," Desmond said, grinning through a throat gone tight. The crowd quieted, as he stepped up to the microphone. Cameras clicked. A news crew adjusted its angle. But Desmond kept his focus on Caleb, standing beside his mother's chair, one hand resting on it, uncomfortable with the attention, but standing tall anyway. "Thank you all for coming," Desmond began. 6 months ago, I did something I hadn't done in years. I put on a name tag, that wasn't mine, and went to work in one of my own kitchens. I wanted to understand what was actually happening on the ground, in the places where the real work gets done. He paused. What I found changed everything. Not just for one employee. For me. He gestured toward Caleb, who looked, in that moment, like he wanted very badly to be anywhere else. I found a young man working the night shift, chopping vegetables at 3 in the morning in an empty kitchen. I found someone who'd given up a full scholarship to one of the finest culinary schools in the country to care for his mother, after a devastating accident. Someone who worked himself past exhaustion, every single night, without complaint, without asking for a single thing in return. Noreen reached out, with what mobility she had, and squeezed her son's hand. He squeezed back, blinking hard, jaw tight. Caleb Reyes reminded me why I started this company 23 years ago. Desmond's voice thickened, and he let it, no longer interested in hiding what any of this cost him to say out loud. Not to build an empire. To build a place, where good work gets seen. Where sacrifice doesn't disappear into a spreadsheet. Where nobody has to drown quietly just, because nobody thought to ask. He paused. Looked out at the crowd, and there, near the back, unexpected, was a face he hadn't dared hope to see. Grant. Standing at the edge of the gathering, Theo balanced on one hip, watching his father, with an expression Desmond couldn't fully read, from that distance. Careful. Guarded. But there. He'd come. He'd actually come. Desmond's breath caught. He forced his focus back to the microphone, back to Caleb, because there would be time, there would finally, blessedly, be time, for the other conversation later. 6 months ago, Caleb was surviving, Desmond continued, voice steadier now. Today, he's thriving. He's finishing his second semester with a 4.0. He's become an essential part of this company. And today, as assistant kitchen director, he's helping open a restaurant that's going to serve this whole community, and open doors for people just like him. The crowd applauded. Caleb's face flushed, but his smile, when it came, was entirely genuine. Desmond picked up the oversized ribbon-cutting scissors. Held them out. I think you should do the honors. Me? Caleb's eyes went wide. This is your restaurant. No, Desmond said, gentle, certain. This is our restaurant. And it starts with you. Caleb took the scissors with shaking hands. Noreen was crying now, happy tears, filming on her phone, with fingers that trembled, but held steady enough to capture the moment. Before I cut this, Caleb said, voice carrying out, over the crowd, I want to say something. He looked at Desmond. 6 months ago, I thought my life was over. I thought I'd used up every chance I was ever going to get. His voice cracked, caught, kept going anyway. I was drowning, and I didn't even know how to ask anybody for help. Mr. Whitaker saw me. Really saw me. And he didn't just give me a paycheck, or a promotion. He gave me my future back. He turned to his mother. Mom. You always told me good things happen to good people. I stopped believing that after the accident. I believe it again now. Noreen nodded, tears streaming, unable to speak past the emotion in her throat. Caleb positioned the scissors on the ribbon. This restaurant isn't just about food, he said. It's about second chances. About not giving up, even when everything feels impossible. And about the people, who finally see you, when you've spent years believing nobody ever would. He cut the ribbon in one clean motion. The crowd erupted. Cameras flashed. Music started somewhere inside, and the doors swung open, staff pouring through to welcome the first guests, into Field and Flame, Columbus. Desmond stayed rooted near the entrance a moment longer, watching Caleb kneel by his mother's chair, foreheads touching, sharing something private in the middle of a very public celebration. Then he turned, and found Grant already walking toward him, Theo squirming happily on his hip. Neither of them said anything at first. 6 years doesn't dissolve in a single walk across a parking lot. But Grant stopped in front of him, close enough that Desmond could see Theo's eyes, his own mother's eyes, somehow, passed down 2 generations later, and held out one small, uncertain hand. Dad. Just that. One word. But it landed harder than any ribbon-cutting speech Desmond had ever given in 23 years. You came, Desmond said, voice breaking on it. Saw the interview clip online. What you said about the kid. About showing up. Grant's jaw worked, careful, choosing words like they still cost something. Figured maybe you meant it about more than just employees. I did. Desmond reached out, hand hovering, uncertain whether he'd earned the right to touch either of them yet. I mean it about you too, Grant. I should have meant it a long time ago. Grant studied him a long moment. Then, slowly, extended his hand. Desmond took it. Held it. A handshake, not a hug, not yet, not all at once, some bridges you cross one careful step at a time, but real. Solid. A beginning instead of an ending. He's beautiful, Desmond said, looking at Theo, who studied him back, with the frank, unguarded curiosity only babies still had left in them. Yeah, Grant said, something softening in his face for the first time. He is. Theo reached out one small hand toward Desmond's face, grabbing at nothing in particular the way babies do, and Desmond laughed, a real laugh, unplanned, the kind that comes from somewhere too deep to fake. "Hi, Theo," he said, voice thick. "I'm your grandfather. I'm sorry it took me so long to say that." Behind them, inside the restaurant, the celebration carried on, glasses raised, music playing, a young chef named Caleb Reyes standing in the kitchen of a restaurant that bore his story written into its walls in every way that mattered. Desmond turned back once, catching Caleb's eye, through the open kitchen window. The young man raised a glass in his direction, grinning, not the tired, hollow smile from 6 months ago, but something bright, unguarded, full of a future that finally belonged to him. Desmond raised his own glass in return. Then he turned back to his son and his grandson, standing together in a parking lot in Columbus, Ohio, on a bright Saturday afternoon in May, and understood, finally, with a clarity that had taken him 52 years, and one undercover week to earn. That the strongest people were never the ones standing at the top. They were the ones who kept showing up. Even when nobody was watching. Even when it was 3 in the morning, and the kitchen was empty, and all that was left was a knife, a cutting board, and a reason worth staying for.